Jai, Tulsi Maharani ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Sai. All right. Time for class. Okay, cartels. Microphone. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Jaya Radha Madhuva Kunjabi Bhagavati 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 Gopi Jana Bhagavat Girivardhati Gopi Jana Bhagavat Girivardhati Gopi Jana Bhagavat Girivardhati Gopi Jana Bhagavat Girivardhati Sudanandana Vraja Janurandana Sudanandana Vraja Januranjana Punatera Vanachari Yamunatera Vanachari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paravatikacharya, also Teta Satashi Shimad, His Divine Grace Abhaya Chalana Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shitweda Garadha Shri Vasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radhakrishna Gopi Gopinath Swayam Mukunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavanam Ki Jai. Machuram Ki Jai. Jagannath Swami Ki Jai. Yamunamai Ki Jai. Shrimati Lasi Devi Ki Jai. Samveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaur Premananda. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the Shri Guru and Gauranga Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Budle Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaurvani Pajani Nivesesha Sunyavali Pasyate Shatani. Okay, so we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, 25th chapter, text 22, those of you who have devices, which is probably everybody. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Mayi Ananyena Bhavena Bhaktim Kurante Ye Dridam Matkrite Jakta Karmanas Jakta Swajana Bandava Mayananyena Bhavena Bhaktim Kurvanti Yedridam Matkrite Jakta Karmanas Jakta Swajana Pandava Mayananyena Bhavena Bhaktim Kurvanti Yedridham Matkrite Jakta Karmanas Jakta Swajana Bandava Mayananyena Bhavena Bhaktim Kurvanti Yedridham Matkrite Jakta Karmanas Jakta Swajana Bandava. Okay, someone try.
Mayananyena bhavena bhaktim kurvanti ye dhridam matkrite tyaktva karmanas tyaktya svajana bandhava
Mayananyena bhavena bhaktim kurvanti ye dhrudham matkrite tyaktva karmanas tyaktva svajana bandhava
Mayananyena bhavena bhaktim kurvanti ye dridham matkrite tattva karmanas tyakta svajana bandhava
Mayananyena bhavena bhaktim kurvanti yedidam matkrite tyakta karmanas tyakta svajana bandhava
Mayananyena bhavena Bhakti kurvanti ye dhridam Matkrite tyakta karmenas Tyakta svajana bandhava
Okay. Mai unto me. Ananyena bhavena with undeviated mind. Bhaktim devotional service. Kurvanti perform. Yea those who Dridhang staunch. Matkrite for my sake. Jakta renounced. Karmana activities. Jakta renounced. Swajana family relationships. Bandhava friendly acquaintances. So translation, Such a sadhu engages in staunch devotional service to the Lord without deviation. For the sake of the Lord, he renounces all other connections, such as family relationships and friendly acquaintances within the world. Okay. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. A person of the renounced order of life, a sannyasi, is also called a sadhu because he renounces everything, his home, his comfort, his friends, his relatives, and his duties to friends and to family. He renounces everything for the sake of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A sannyasi is generally in the renounced order of life, but his renunciation will be successful only when his energy is employed in the service of the Lord with great austerity. It is said here, therefore, Vaktim Kuranti Ye Dridam. A person who seriously engages in the service of the Lord and is in the renounced order of life is a sadhu. A sadhu is one who has given up all responsibility to society, family, and worldly humanitarianism simply for the service of the Lord. As soon as he takes his birth in the world, a person has so many responsibilities and obligations to the public, to the demigods, to the great sages, to the general living beings, to his parents, to the family forefathers, and to many others. When he gives up all such obligations for the sake of the service of the Supreme Lord, he is not punished for such renunciation of obligation. But if for sense gratification a person renounces all such obligations, he is punished by the law of nature. Heavy verse. Mayananyena pavena bhaktim kuranti ye dridham matkrute tyakta karmanas jakta svajanavandavaha. So Omagana Timidandasha Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Nidam Yena Tasmai Shirave Namaha. So in this particular verse, it actually refers back to the previous verse. And the previous verse talks about the different, what we call secondary qualities of the Vaishnava. Secondary qualities, remember we talked about that yesterday. Primary quality is exclusive devotion to the Lord, which is described here. So, this is a very heavy verse describing, in one sense, sannyasis, in another sense, anybody who is a sadhu in any order of life, because we certainly have many sadhus in other orders of life, like Bhaktivinoda Thakur and others in our disciplic succession. Srinivasa Acharya, Bhaktivinoda. I mean, I can go through a whole list of different sadhus. But the quality of a sadhu is that he is given everything up. Not simply given everything up. To give everything up is not very useful. Just like the word sannyas doesn't mean giving everything up. It's composed of two different words, of two different syllables. San and yas. Nyas, or nyasi, which is actually sometimes the name of a renunciate, a nyasi, means one who has renounced everything. But san means one who has accepted everything, which is interesting. Just like we have our song kirtan, right? So song kirtan means complete kirtan, and it also means kirtan accepting the whole world and then chanting together. Together chant kirtan or complete kirtan. So the word sannyas basically means adashaktasya vishayan yatahar mukhyunjita nirbandha Krishna sambandhe yuktivairagyam uchate. To engage everything in Krishna's service, not to simply give things up. That's called yukta vairagya. Yukta vairagya means that the renunciation is to engage things in Krishna's service, not to artificially give. Just like Prabhupada gives the example of what real renunciation is, spiritual renunciation. He says, let's say we're walking down the road and we see a pile of money on the street. Okay. And then we say, I renounce it. It's not yours. I mean, what can you renounce? It's never yours to begin. But we're thinking that pile of money is ours. What do I mean by that? We're thinking that these things that belong to us, our home, our car, our mobile phone, our computer, our family, they're mine. Mine. Isn't it? Ahamameti. And of course, this is one of the two divisions of the ahankara, or false ego, I and mine. But a devotee knows that nothing is mine. Why? What do you think? That everything belongs to Krishna. Isha Vasham Idam Sarvam Yatkancha Jagadam Jagat Tena Jaktena Bunjidha Vagridha Kashaspidanam. It's Upanishad. First mantra actually. And it's the second mantra, but it's actually the first. The first mantra is the introduction. So what does that mean? Everything is owned and controlled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Krishna is lending us something to use in this lifetime. Just like you're working for someone. This is an example I use often. Let's say you're someone's chauffeur. You know what a chauffeur is? A driver. In India, everyone has their drivers, right? The drivers sleep in the car, they eat in the car, they live in the car, right? Isn't that true?
Yeah.
I mean, their whole life is the car. I mean, I don't know how they bathe in the car, but somehow or they manage, and they don't go to the bathroom in the car. But basically, you go down the street and you see them sleep. All these rich people, you see the drivers sleeping in the car. But he understands that the car is not meant for his enjoyment. If he takes the car, which has been given to him by the master, the boss, and he goes for a joyride, you know what a joyride is? Then he's a rascal, and he can lose his job. So in the same way, everything has been, we have a quota, actually it describes in the Upanishad. Krishna is giving us a quota of intelligence, a quota of, whatever material assets that we have, the family, whatever, but it all belongs to him. And this is understood in the 15th chapter of the Gita, where the path of going back to Godhead is actually described, and I believe it's the 5th verse of the 15th chapter, Nirmana Moha Jita Sangha Dosha Avyatma Nicha Vinivrita Kama Dvandvara Vimuktar Sukhaduka Sangyar Gachancha Mudha Paramavyam Tak. Then one has to become free of this conception. Nirmana Moha. It's not mine. Illusion, free of illusion. Moha also. Jita Sangha Dosha. And one of the methodologies of doing that is giving up bad association. Jita Sangha Dosha. Avyatma Nitya. You have to understand the spiritual truth. Vinivrita Kama. And give up this lust. Dvandvar Vimuktar, free of the duality of I and mine. Dvandvar Vimuktar. Sukha Dukkha Samyar, and also happiness and distress. Gachancha Muda Atparamyavyam Tat. That in this way, if you're not bewildered, you can actually become Krishna conscious. So the whole point is to see everything as belonging to Krishna. That's renunciation. That's the point I'm making. Not to simply give things up. Therefore, it's called sannyas. And so you can be an actual sannyasi without being formally in the renounced order. Formally means, you took the ceremony of sannyas like I did. You get your little danda. Nowadays, ladies want to take sannyas and get danditas. Isn't it? Doesn't work like that. Why is it that ladies don't take sannyas? I mean, that's an interesting question. Because we get this in the Western world all the time. The ladies come, we're preaching at the university and they come and say, why can't women take sannyas? And this is a real hard one to explain because, there's the liberation movement and everything like that. And I say, I say, because, actually, the real reason, and then there's the reason I explain to them, which are two different things. The real reason is women need to be protected, but if you tell them that, oh my God, you will need to be protected. Isn't it? So you don't tell them that. So the way I explain it, it's quite interesting. The way I explain it to the ladies, I said, women don't take sannyas because they don't need to, because men have such big false egos, they need a position. Hey, it's good to see you. How'd you get here? So, anyway, so it works. And they say, yeah, that's right. These men, they need like a title and a danda. And we're renounced. We're much more renounced than them, which isn't true. But anyway, so sometimes you have to become expert in explaining things to people in the modern day and age. So anyway, so sannyas. So basically, anyone, getting back to the point, anyone in any situation, ladies can become just as renounced as sannyasis without the title. And grahastas can become just as renounced, and brahmacharis can become just as renounced, simply by understanding the principle of manasa deha gehe yokishamor aprilam tu yokpade nanda kushor, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur states. My mind, my body, my words, everything is yours. Nanda Kishore, Krishna. So my children belong to you. They're not meant to give me satisfaction. And so therefore you think the best thing, then you take care of the children and you try to bring them up in Krishna consciousness rather than just turning them into little materialists and not allowing them to join the Hare Krishna movement. We've had so much experience of children wanting to join the Krishna conscious movement and being impeded by their parents in doing so. We actually had one suicide case because the child wanted to be a member of the Krishna conscious movement so much that the parents weren't letting them do it, and they just left their body because they couldn't stand not serving Krishna. So a lot of guilt trips. Of course, generally here we have guilt trips in the opposite direction, where the parents try to force the children to be Krishna conscious and not understanding that the children have their own free will to decide whether or not to be Krishna conscious. So that's another issue. So, but one really has to have that consciousness that everything belongs to Krishna. And part of that consciousness, it talked about renouncing family, part of that consciousness is that Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmani Gavi Hastani Suni Chaiva Svapaki Cha Pandita Samadarshana. Seeing all living entities equal. Now, of course, you don't tell that to your wife. That could be dangerous. If your wife says, "Do you love me?" You say, "I love all living entities." I mean, like Prabhupada said, oh my God, in the ideal grahastha life, the husband has to be detached but act as if he's attached. So he has to say, "Yes, I love you, here's some flowers." But instead, someone who doesn't understand how to act, he'll say, "All living entities are equal, you're just another living entity." And flowers are meant for Krishna, not some jiva soul. So Prabhupada said one has to actually act in a certain way, act as attached, but be detached internally. Of course, we don't require people be as detached as Lord Ramchandra was when he sent Sita Devi away to the forest. I mean, if someone criticizes your wife, don't send her away. Don't send her in India or something. No, that's a little... But Lord Ramchandra was showing as ideal king, because a sadhu is not only someone who is a Brahmin, but a Kshatriya is also supposed to be a sadhu. Therefore, a Kshatriya king is called Raja Rishi, because he's also on that platform. You see that with Yudhisthira Maharaj and particularly with Lord Ramchandra. Because nowadays, the kings, so-called kings, prime ministers, etc., they have their own interests at heart before the interests of the citizens. But even, there's that other expression as far as a king with citizens, the citizens and actually all the animals are called praja. Generally when you use the word praja, it means your kids, right? It means those who were born, praja. But basically, if I say to a grahasta, where's your praja? Grahasta's not going to say all living entities are my children. It just doesn't work like that. But for a king or for an administrator or for a person who's in charge of other people in a Krishna conscious context, then praja is all living entities. So therefore you have Maharaj Yudhisthira who's protecting the bull and the cow because he sees them all, and Prabhupada made that point very strongly, that all the citizens include the animals. So that's a very important consideration for someone who wants to be a sadhu. Vidya vinaya sampane brahmini gabhyastami shuni chaiva swapake cha pandita samvadarshana. All living entities, a dog eater, a cow, an outcast and everything. You see them all as your children. So that's a sadhu's consciousness, to see everyone like their children, rather than the skin disease or the creeping means I have some children and the other people are not so significant. Of course, as I said, as grahastas, you have your duty, you have to act in a certain way, but cultivate that internal consciousness. And if you are a sadhu, actual sadhu, then you'll have the spiritual potency to preach Krishna consciousness, because you'll actually understand the true inherent connection between everybody, and you will be able to connect to people. When you talk to them, it's not that you're talking to someone who's an outsider, you're talking to someone who's a member of your family. And that's a Krishna conscious perspective, that we see everyone. Prabhupada said that's first class God consciousness, to see everyone as our brother and sister. Prabhupada was saying that in relationship to a meeting he had with some Franciscan monks. Franciscan? St. Francis?
Yes.
You heard of St. Francis. St. Francis had this whole conception that all living entities are his brothers and sisters. In fact, the whole creation is his brother and sister. And Prabhupada said, that is first class God consciousness. So if one has that consciousness, then one is actually a sadhu. Now, the final point Prabhupada makes in the purport is quite interesting. That if someone renounces all obligations and he's not at that level, it's grossly sinful to do that. Because then, Prabhupada said, he'll be punished by the law or the laws of nature. So these obligations should not be renounced unless one is actually qualified to renounce the obligations. And even if you're qualified to renounce the obligations, what is it? Yad yad charit shreshtas tata devetro janaha. Then you should, in most cases, not do it, because it'll set a bad example. We have certain personalities who renounced all social obligations, like, the Babajis, for example, like Gaurkashoda's Babaji Maharaj, or Lord Rishabhadev, and others. And this is not for us to do. So the renunciation from obligations, again, has to be done internally, not externally. Even if one is, like myself, I'm in the renounced order of life in the formal sense. I don't renounce my obligations to society. I still function as a member of society, even though technically it might be more pleasurable just to be an avadhuta. No responsibilities, no like that. But for preaching Krishna consciousness, we set a different example, and we actually act in such a way, as Prabhupada said, to be perfect ladies and gentlemen. Oops. Well, it's a nice sound. I use that for my alarm in the morning. So, anyway, so the main thing is don't renounce your obligations. And actually, as far as obligations are concerned, there's an interesting verse by, I think it was by Madhvacharya, where he says, my apologies to the demigods, because we have these obligations even to the demigods. Those of you who come from India, which is everyone here, or Fiji, you know the demigods supply the air, the light, and everything like that. So we have some obligations. Just like, well, going back to the one story in the Krishna book is the obligation that the residents of Vrindavan had to Indra. Indra supplies the rain. So you have an obligation to him. And Krishna was showing, no, if you serve him, you don't have that obligation anymore. And actually, if we thought about all of our obligations to the demigods, there'd be millions of obligations. Isn't it?
Yes, yes.
There's so many demigods. There's the demigod of the water, and Varuna, and then we have Vayu, and then we have Indra with the rain, and I don't remember all the demigods. There's too many of them to remember. And so we'd have to have an altar with all the demigods on it. Because if you just worship Durga, that's not enough. You've got to cover every base. Every single one of them. Or else you're a rascal. So it's actually easier to just serve Krishna. That takes care of all of them.
That's true.
Isn't it?
Yeah, that's
But you could still respect them as servants of Krishna and give them respect and even a little worship as servants of Krishna. But you have no more obligation. No more obligation to the demigods. But you do have obligations in general society, and you should fulfill those obligations to set a good example. All right, so any questions or comments about any of these points, I may? Now's your time. Questions? Yes.
So I was watching a talk last night.
Bye.
It was just on TikTok. I was scrolling through it, but they used a metaphor, and I was wondering what your opinion is. The metaphor they used was, if your husband says to you, "Love me or else I will hit you," is he a loving husband? The answer is no. So then, how can you say that God is a loving God if He says He's going to send you to hell if you don't love Him?
Okay. So first of all, if your husband says, there's two different things. Love me or I'll hit you, he may be just joking. So you don't always take the words at face value. But God is not saying that. I mean, where in the Vedic literature does Krishna say, either worship me or I'll send you to hell? Is there any verse like that? He says, if you don't worship me, you get the good and the bad, depending on your karma. He gives you a process. He gives you the process of karma. There's karma kanja. So you don't have to worship God to enjoy the material world. You can worship some of the demigods, or you can just do some karma kanja activities, There's many Hindus who do karma kanja activities. So Krishna's not saying that. But it is true. If Krishna said, you worship me or you go to hell, that would not make him a loving God. In fact, most of the conceptions that they have outside of Krishna consciousness are those of a very hateful, demoniac God. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Let's take the Christian conception, or what's generally understood as a Christian conception, is that you got one life, okay? That's pretty demoniac anyway. You just get one chance. If you blow it and there's one life, no more chances. I remember reading a Christian pamphlet years and years ago. And there was this, the pamphlet, these little tiny pamphlets like that. There was a guy who just didn't surrender to Jesus Christ in that life. And then they depicted him in the vat of burning oil. and he's there, and he's praying to God, and God is saying, "You blew it. It's too late, buddy." Something like that. That means that's a demoniac person, that particular God, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who says you get one chance. That is not compassion. Compassion means you give people another chance, and another chance, and another chance eternally. So their conception of one life, and one life you do it or you don't do it, is actually pretty demoniac. So and from that perspective, they're right. And so, and then the conception, eternal hell too. It's not just like you go to hell for a few minutes. That you're there forever. In fact, you're being punished for a philosophical mistake. Not, philosophical, theological mistake. Can you imagine that? Like if I'm giving class and I make a mistake, I quote the wrong verse. You go to hell. I mean, being punished eternally for a philosophical mistake just because you didn't join the right church. And the Muslims, it's very similar with the Muslims too. So their criticism of God is true. That you love me in the generally what's understood as Christianity, generally what's understood as the Islamic tradition, is something like that. That either you worship me, love me in this life, or eternal damnation. Now the religion I was brought up in was a little bit better. But it was crazy too. Is that if you're born in this particular religion, you're one of the chosen people. And because you're chosen, you can do any damn thing and you go back to Godhead. So that's even better. God's much more compassionate in that religion. But he's stupid in that religion. So we want a conception of God who's intelligent and compassionate, and our conception is like that. Hey Krishna Karna Sindhu. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not demanding Sarva Dharmam Prachaja Mami Kam Sharanam Pracha. He's simply saying, just chant the holy names, or he's Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Padaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Kursedva. He goes after you. You don't love me? That's okay. I'm going to chase you until you love me. Because that's your nature. It's not a threat. It's a question of understanding your nature. Your nature is that you're part and parcel of Krishna, and the only way you're going to be happy just because of your nature. And Krishna didn't create that nature. We are eternally of that nature. And the only way you fit in, just like a piece of a puzzle, some of us, when we were young, we played with puzzles. Anyone here ever played with puzzles? And so sometimes you get so frustrated that you take a piece and you force it in where it doesn't really belong. Do you ever do that? You're just like, oh my God, where does this fit in? All those little holes in it and everything. I'm sure we all did that, one extent to the other. So, but it doesn't really fit in, and the whole puzzle becomes misshapen because of that. So we're like that piece in the puzzle. The only way we fit in is serving God. The only way we're going to be happy is serving God, because that's our nature.
Yeah.
So you may say, why doesn't God change our nature? But if God changed our nature, we wouldn't be us. There's an eternal nature. And God wants us to be happy. It's not that he's cursing us for being unhappy. He's in anxiety. Even God is experiencing pain because of us being here. And anxiety over us. So anyway, their criticism is valid, except for us. We're the best. Our team is number one. Well, we respect the other teams, but they have the wrong plays. Is that? They just have the wrong coach,
That's right, that sounds good. Wrong coach.
No, and we accept Lord Jesus Christ. I mean, we're the actual Christians. We accept that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. We follow Jesus Christ. You should love the Lord thy God. At least we should try. You love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and all thy might. We want to do that. But simply to accept Jesus Christ or God in name only is not God consciousness, is not love. Krishna wants our love voluntarily. Therefore, he could force us. He doesn't have to threaten us. Krishna could force us just by willing it. But by doing that, he would be interfering with our loving propensity. Okay, good question. So, who else has a question? Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Very well.
Maharaj, in Bhagavad Gita chapter 5, I think Lord says like between karma sannyasa and karma doing with determination or with devotion, both are favorable.
But of the two, work in devotion is better.
Yeah, better. So similarly, I think he gives an example of Janaka Maharaja who being the Raja Rishi. So in this verse, are we referring, when we are saying renouncing, are we referring doing karma with devotion, or we are saying the karma sannyasa?
We're talking about karma with devotion. That's what this verse is referring to. I mean, the Bhagavatam has every verse is in reference to pure devotional service in the Bhagavatam. We actually understand it. The Bhagavatam would not advocate work, simple, renunciation of work, but in connection with devotion. And if we read the verse, it's actually quite obvious. Because there's part of it that says, he renounces all connections, such as family relationships and family acquaintances within the world. But, bodily, he renounces all connections, is the operative word here. So in other words, he doesn't have any special connections with anybody, but he has a connection with everybody. That's the implicit meaning here. Okay? Other questions? Yeah.
So Gurudev, just a question in relation to Proverbs 9:10. As they say, you're talking about Christianity and Jesus Christ. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of the wisdom. So as they say, so how do we, is it fear or is it love and compassion, a love towards the Supreme?
Well, actually, if you read the original Hebrew in that psalm, it's the fear, the actual translation is not fear as we know it, is awe. Because I know Hebrew. I did study Hebrew. And I forget the actual Hebrew word for it. But it's the awe.
Okay.
Just like if that's worshiping God in awe and reverence is the beginning of devotion. Just like Arjuna, he was awed, a little fearful too, by the universal form. And that's really what it's in reference to. Simply being afraid of God is not going to really bring one to devotion. You can be afraid of someone you hate. Like we have that picture of Yamaraj that I showed you. It's fearful.
Yes.
But I'm not going to start to worship him because I'm afraid of Yamaraj. But, and I forget the exact Hebrew word right now. It's interesting. But I do know that psalm. It's the awe of God. Unless someone knows Hebrew here. So, awe. Awe and reverence. So devotion starts with Vaidhi Bhakti. Vaidhi Bhakti is awe and reverence. God, my dear Lord, please give me this, please give me that, whatever. But he's great. And Bhagavad Gita primarily establishes that mood. Bhagavad Gita does not get into intimacy that much. I mean, there's a little hint of it when Krishna says, I'm Bhaktosi Shaka Sheti, that I'm giving you this information because you're my friend as well as my devotee. But you don't really have full-blown intimacy described in Bhagavad Gita. It's all, universal form. Aham sarvasya prabhu. That's more honor, reverence right there. Mataksa sarvam pravartadeti matva bhajanti mam pudabhavan samavata. That's all on reverence. So Gita is on reverence. That's why it's the ABCs of Krishna consciousness. And then after the Gita, you get to the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is more intimacy. And then you get to the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is super intimate. It's much more raganuga. So you actually see a progression there from, pure Vaidhi, which is practically Bhagavad Gita, to the raganuga of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Okay? Other questions?
What is the word era?
What?
Era. Y-I-R-A-H. In Hebrew.
Ira, yeah. So yeah, that's it. So it's like on reverence. Oh, good. Didn't know you were Jewish. Anandamoy Schwartz. Yeah.
There's in Padma Puran, there's a just read the translation. Every relationships are a result of previous birth and bondage. So if that's the case, your previous answer was, are we the right team? Then what do we have if it's based on the previous bondage then?
No. Every material relationship is based on previous bondage and attachments. But our relationships in this team are based upon Lord Chaitanya's mercy and Srila Prabhupada's mercy, or given by the acharyas. That's an exception to the material. These are not material relationships. If they were material relationships, we'd all be from the same part of India or same part of the world. Look at this, United Nations of the spiritual world. We got people here from South India. We got people here from the country of Fiji. And where else do we have people? People from America.
North India.
North India.
Australian.
Do we have any Aussies? No. You're a wannabe.
Yeah.
You're a half-breed. So, this is really, would we normally be hanging out together?
Yeah. I do quite a few like friends.
Yeah, because you're all Aussies. That's different. Because you're a different generation than us. Because you're brought up here, you look Indian, but you ain't. And that's why your parents get confused when they see you. They say, looks like us, but it's not. That's the ABCD confusion. Because the parents are looking at, just, wow. He just looks like he has my eyes, my nose, my mouth. But he has Ravana's demeanor. So, yeah, that's ABC. That's true. You have friends who are Aussies, but normally, those of us in this generation, we generally be hanging out with people of our same socio-economic, racial, class, because we wouldn't be on the spiritual platform. You associate with people who are like you. Even myself, I would just be hanging out with people from New York. Not even people from the South of the United States, because they speak in a funny way. Well, all you want to do, I come here and observe you all. It's interesting. I might go to different countries, but just as a tourist. If I went to India, I would just go as a tourist. Oh, that's interesting. Taj Mahal, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I would never really get to know anybody, most likely. Does that sound all right? So, yeah. So here it is, United Nations in the spiritual world. I mean, if you go to Mayapur, you got Russians, you got Chinese, Japanese. I could never understand Chinese people before, but if they're devotees, I can be friends with them. I mean, I have friends with people of all the nationalities. And you're just friends with people from Australia. Yeah, because your identification is as an Aussie. I'm just teasing it. I mean, obviously he has friends from all over. So,
One question.
one more question here.
As we know that if someone do suicide, that he don't get liberated and he suffer till the time his death. And if someone, like you just mentioned about the person who left the body because of Krishna consciousness, he can't go into Krishna consciousness, is that person have the same effect?
That's a little bit different, because that person gave up, it was a lady, her body, had a feeling intense separation from Krishna, being in this conflict situation. So there's always exceptions. I'm not recommending it.
Yeah, obviously, because it's not very
But it's something she couldn't tolerate, separation from Krishna. And her parents later on apologized to me. You know, they were upset that she did it, obviously, but they apologized.
And regarding that matra rin, like parents rin, which we have because of being born from them.
Yeah.
In today's society, it's so much conflict between parents and kids also.
Yeah.
And is that also created as taken as a sin if they don't have a proper bond and the kids get separated and parents they don't look after parents?
Is that a sin? Not necessarily. It may be the parent's karma, it may be the child's karma. Not necessarily, I wouldn't say sin. Sin is a heavy word. Or it may be Krishna's arrangement to help them focus more on their Krishna consciousness. You know, let's tell the story of Maharaj Anga. He's an interesting personality. Maharaj Anga was a great king. And he just had a wife who was a little challenged. And the boys usually take after the mother. So he had this beautiful little kid named Vena. And this Vena, because his mother was actually like the daughter of fear personified, this Vena, he used to go out and play with his friends and he'd kill them all. His mother would say, "Where are your friends, Vena?" And he would say, "I killed them, Mom." And she didn't mind, you know, because she was also pretty bad. And so his father was really upset. First he was thinking, this is a really bad son. Oh my God, what did I do to deserve it? But then he said, but he's a good son.
Yeah.
Because this gives me an opportunity to take sannyas. That's his... It's a story in the Bhagavatam. Don't blame me for it. To become renounced. So he becomes renounced. Vena takes over the kingdom and creates havoc in the kingdom. He wants to be worshipped as God. Of course, he's pretty good with taking care of criminals, but he's... So finally all the brahmanas get together and they do sort of a sacrifice or chant mantras and kill Veda with the mantras. But the problem is, this is such an interesting story in the Bhagavatam, the problem is there's no king and then all the criminals start to run around. So what they do is they do some genetic engineering, cloning. They clone Vena's genes, they take out the bad genes and they put it, you know, somehow or other they do this clone. It's called churning, they actually clone. And then they come out with a new king and queen too. Prithu and Archie, you know. So anyway, it's an interesting story, but one does see things that happen, especially when one's a devotee, and tries to learn lessons from it, and tries to understand what Krishna wants me to do about it. There's a lot of things that are outside of our control. You know, sometimes people have children who are their enemies in their lives. I'm not saying that's the case in your case. But and sometimes people get married to someone who was their enemy in the last life. there's all sorts of tricks of karma and attachment that occur. Whatever situation one is in, one has to see, why is Krishna put me in this situation? What do I have to learn from it? And what do I have to do in that circumstance? Okay? All right, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.